Alrighty. Hello. Hang on a second, I have a fan thing going. There, that was unhelpful. However, I can fix it. Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and we're going to do a little coding and talk about various things that have been going on in Airwindows land and whatever else or whatever is going on in your world. Seeing as I will have chat up on my video feed momentarily, as I often like to do. And as people turn up, I can say hello. There you are, all ready for when somebody shows up and says hi. So, it's been an interesting couple of weeks. I am beginning to get going with the VST plugins for M1 Macs. As you know, I already have VST plugins, but the thing is, people running on the new processors might want to take advantage of that in such a way that they can do something like run Reaper with Airwindows VSTs all native on the M1. And so I'm beginning with that stuff. I have, unless I am mistaken, all of the ones starting with A put together into a package that you can download. And I'll be adding to those as they go. It shouldn't take too terribly long. It's just one of those things where it's going to take a while, and I just got through with doing this entire process for all the AUs. So it's pretty heavy. It probably won't take me too many weeks, but we shall see. And I've also had some changes in other things. And also apparently I have 191 dropped frames. Wonder what's going on with that. I bet it was when I was launching Chrome. No, wait, it couldn't have been. Maybe it was when I was turning on the chat window. Okay, well, no matter. If the video crashes, I'll do something about that. So, recently I've talked to my Patreon about the process of what I'm doing on Wednesdays. Namely, I promised that if I hit $2,000 a month, which I have done, I had this idea that I was going to do DIY synths, and as I will typically do, I was busy inventing things, and I have come up with a concept where it's possible to put together very sophisticated stuff with not a lot of expense. And I'm kind of calling it soldercore, and I've done a lot of preparatory work towards getting this together. One of the things that does mean is that if I choose to make like musical instruments or guitar stomp boxes or who knows what, I could basically charge off and do enormous quantities of that because I have all the tools. Hey, Dude Craft, have a good time at school. So that is something that's worthwhile. My sense was I wanted to be able to do stuff for people who didn't have the budget to run around buying lots of computers and and stuff like that, or people who are interested in the kinds of things we can do in analog. So the thing is, I've been doing this for a few weeks now, and it's very slow going. Like, I'm confident with the way that the system works, and I've put a lot of effort into getting all the cameras and things together so that I can show people how this is done. I've gone to a lot of trouble because I felt like there was no point starting it if I couldn't start it up properly. But all the same, people seem to just treat it as just hanging out, and I'm not convinced that there is that much demand for care packages of transistors and things. Not that that wouldn't be cool. I would say, I continue to hold like, okay, if you want that, ask for it. I can totally set you up. But people aren't really going like, yeah, I want to spend hours and hours soldering little things together. And so I asked my Patreon, more or less, what should I do? I said, here, I've started doing this. I'm committed to it. I'm committed to doing something special. But I'm concerned that this is not very popular with people. It's not really taking off in the way that I would like. So I would ask, do you want me to be doing this DIY synth stuff? Or would you like me to use the excess money beyond like $2,000 on the Patreon? Because I promised I would do something with that. I felt like as long as I've got my needs taken care of on a month-to-month basis, I'm really not the hoarding money like a dragon kind of guy. And I wanted to give back to the community. So I also asked, would you rather I just save up for fancier samplers and things? Because I've been saying all along, there's a variety of stuff that is not attainable to me. Like, I can get a Mackie 1202 because most likely so can you. It's less than $100 worth of antique mixer. It's not really very good, but it's a terrific stomp box. And, I was able to pick one of those up very easily, even a pre-VLC one. They're not that pricey. I was also able to pick up a whole bunch of op amps of the same design. So my hope is that I can build some circuits. If somebody likes the sound of this thing, I might be able to duplicate it in a little circuit board thing that you could power even maybe with a 9-volt battery, and then loop out to analog in your DAW for crushing stuff through this very high distortion of the antique Mackie mixer type. I don't know how well that's going to work, but I do know that it would work better than any plugin, including mine. Well, when I asked this question, oh my God, the response that I got was enormously, overwhelmingly, hey David, go and buy samplers and gear and make plugins of those. People were huge. It was like a flood of people going, this is what we want. This is what we want. Never mind that DIY synth stuff. I don't want to sit around soldering things together. Make me more plugins. And I have to listen. So I'm in a sort of reappraisal phase at the moment, in that I'm going to continue tinkering with the circuit design stuff. I still think it's interesting. Like David here in the stream, you remember me talking about making the secret briefcase? I still have that briefcase. Now I have all of the rack rails and such that I could put together for building such a thing. And even a power supply, although it does need to be plugged into the wall. I really liked the idea of having a secret briefcase with synthesizer style stuff that looked just like an insane mad scientist conglomeration of little circuit boards and wires and things. Anybody would open it and go, oh my God, it's a bomb. Ah. And that to me is extremely funny and cool. So I'm most likely going to proceed towards doing that, but it's going to be a little bit more in my own time because I'm not seeing the demand from the community that I was trying to help and do stuff for. What I was seeing from the community was two things. One of them was get the boutique analog gear, or indeed classic sampler gear, that turns out to be a big thing, that we can't have, and make plugins of that so that we can have that for free in plugin form. And that makes a lot of sense to me. Other thing people were saying was, yeah, save the money and go on a vacation. To me, that's funny to me because I don't really do that very much. Best I can do is find ways where the stuff that I do every day is things that I enjoy. And on that note, I'm thinking probably this next Wednesday, I am going to take a little break from the slowly soldering things together. I'm going to return to that. There will be more of that because I find it amusing, but I'm going to take a little break from that and either be jamming on the modular synthesizer, which I think I have live and plugged in. Hang on. Yeah, does this work? Yep. So it's possible that on Wednesday I can fire up that and be doing that sort of thing. Because I miss doing it. I don't have the bandwidth for getting back into that. And fairly similarly to, here, I'll scooch over. I will be sitting in this kind of zone here for this. Fairly similarly to a guy that I like to follow, Colin Benders. He is in a massive rebuild phase with his synthesizer stuff. Has 10 or 20 times as much of it as me. But what he's been doing is he went and did some live gigs, took it all apart, and started putting it together again in a new form, which I've done frequently. I've often reconfigured everything, and I haven't often made streams of that. Maybe it would be good if I did. Like, I don't know whether people would like to see that unless you tell me. I guess I've assumed that you probably didn't, but Colin's situation is a little bit different because he is using a power supply system. This is a power supply system from Pittsburgh Modular. It's the modular structure case. But Colin's system is some kind of mad thing out of England where all of his power supplies are like 2 amps on all of the different rails, and the rails are bus bars along the back of the box. Not printed circuit boards, not Eurorack, bus bars where you bolt like 28 gauge or so wires, which themselves go out to where the modules are. And you're supposed to sort of shape them to length. So every time he reconfigures his thing, he has to build an entirely new set of wires. And I know what that feels like because when I was setting up the EMU sampler, which I've done, I needed to build a set of balanced cables to connect it to my Motu 16A and vice versa. So I built an entire set of these cables with very heavy gauge wire and a braided configuration, and then found that they were too short and I had to go and do it all over again. And that's what took me until midnight posting a video of any kind yesterday. So some days are kind of heavy work. Well, Colin's experience is he has about 10 cases this big or so, maybe only 8. And for each of them, each individual module requires that he build power supply wiring harnesses, each of which take him about 10 minutes. So the guy's got like weeks of work to put his system back together. And that is definitely a bit of a drag. But it's been interesting watching him do that, and it's kind of inspiring. So I have to wonder whether people would be interested in hanging out with me as I put this kind of stuff together and get it running, because there's many things that I would like to try to do. For instance, one of the things that I'd like to try to do is I have it's over here, but I'd have to move my microphone to grab it. I've got basically a Korg Nano Control. I think it's Korg that makes these. And a Nano Control has either 8 or 9 channels. Mine actually has 9 channels, but the newer ones apparently would go with 8. And it has a set of buttons built into it, and a fader and a pan pot, and also a switching control where you can access 4 different banks. And all this does is it sends MIDI signals to your DAW. So one thing that I can do now that I am mixing the hardware modular synthesizer in Logic, and I've tried fooling with Reaper, and the thing that trips me up is always, I think it's a great idea, and I just don't have any motor memory for it. I don't have any familiarity with it, so I try it and I go, oh, this is really good, and I'm not clicking with what I need to do in order to do it, so I have to reconstruct things. I really would like to click with it, so I might pursue that again. Another thing that I'd like to click with, and something that I could do streams about, are VCV Rack. I'm still interested in seeing whether the M1 version of that takes off, because I think that's the future for Rack, because you need monster processors to be able to handle it. But this is what I'm going to be doing more of on, like, when I've committed to doing an extra stream on Wednesday. That always happens, because I don't just do stuff and then like if I do things and then go, oh, I'm not going to do it this week, they just stop. I'd like to get back to the synthesizer playing, because I did that for a long time and it didn't always click with people very much, but I learned stuff. And then when I dropped it out of my schedule and stopped doing it regularly, it just stopped. And so I need to build schedules and do things on a regular basis that I commit to, and those are the things that continue. And, you know, the talk of vacations and stuff is more along the lines of whether I'm enjoying the flow of doing that thing. Because I can run on schedules just fine, but it's whether I'm tackling something that really isn't a good match. Oh, I see a positive response on VCV. I would like to I feel that would be a more useful way of teaching people how to do some of these synthesis things. I'll probably want to come up with a few plugins that, even if it's simply just taking what Rack-Windows did, I'm not sure if Rack-Windows is still doing things. It ported some of my plugins over and then may or may not have continued. So I don't know where that went, but there's a few plugins in there. I'd probably want to run with some of that so that I could get some of the things I would personally need ported over to that system. And I may or may not need to be actually running it on the M1 machine, which might mean a non-standard build. It might mean not being able to use the official VCV build because Andrew of VCV doesn't like M1s and doesn't really want to support them, it would appear. I can't swear to that. He does not like it when people say things for him, so I will refrain from doing that, but I've seen some negative comments by him on Apple's whole way of doing this kind of stuff, and he seems suspicious about that it's any good. Hey, Sasha from the Dogs on Acid email filter thread. That's one of the things that I probably should fire this up because it is 11:20. I'm only going to go to 1 or maybe a little after 1 if things start clicking. But one of the things I was going to do today was get into the coding side of things. And we can see whether I can get any mileage out of the preliminary filter stuff. Yeah, I'm talking with the Surge development team on a fairly regular basis. In fact, just the other day, there was somebody who had a bug on an M1 Mac, and they needed my help because I have one. So I said, okay, what do you need? And I downloaded a build of Surge and basically fired it up and did terrible things in logic until I managed to make it crash, and then was able to convey a bug report. And it turns out that the thing that it was crashing over was it was trying to access a folder that Surge hadn't created because there wasn't anything saved yet. Something somewhere was trying to access this folder. So I was handing them over this bug report going like, well, that kind of sucked. I ended up making it crash. It felt very scary and out of control because it's like setting it to musical typing because I don't have a MIDI keyboard. I don't have a Bluetooth MIDI controller yet. And I just had musical typing, and all of the shortcuts in Logic are still enabled when you do that. So it's terrifying. It's like you're trying to play a little melody on the keyboard and then you hit another key and who even knows what happens. So that was very frightening. Oh, hey, Mike, donate. But it succeeded in crashing Logic, and the Logic crash and the bug report. How about I take a vacation and just jam on Wednesday rather than trying to work on DIY synthesizers? That'll probably work for everybody. Although honestly, I might spend all the time dicking around with fancy graphics, like this kind of madness. Actually, yeah, see, that doesn't actually work. But I could do this wackiness. So you want me to take a vacation? I might just stream and do stuff like this all day. As you can see, I have the fun sort of mad video streaming kind of thing. And let's see. Well, didn't expect that. Goodness gracious me. Oh, okay, there we go. So as you can see, I have the wacky video streaming kind of thing. So basically, if you want me to take a vacation, I might as well just do stuff like that. And that counts as fun for me. Although it's interesting because it's kind of like engaging and getting me hooked up with stuff. Like, can get really weird. But that's basically just how I roll. Like, rather than vacation per se, what I will tend to do is anytime I take a day off, I wind up firing up the modular synthesizer or something like that, or reconfiguring my studio in some way. And ending up getting quite busy doing something that is often kind of, it can be kind of like hard work. There can be kind of a lot there, but that's just how I roll. That or I sleep in a lot. That is a good way for me to actually get downtime. Is I can't stop thinking when I'm awake, but I can sleep and just sort of chill out in that way. enough with that. I didn't say I was going to have a vacation today. So rather than continuing to fool with, like I was saying, if you want me to take a vacation, I can take one of my streams and be like, I'm just going to make some noises and play with the video synth. And yeah. The thing about me getting burnt out is it's more likely to happen when I commit to a bunch of stuff that isn't actually clicking with people. Like, there have been times when I was trying to progress the music so hard that I got a little burnt out on the back of that, because I was trying to regularly show up and do live streams or do music live streams that people actually, it developed an audience, which of course is very difficult, multiple days a week. And having tried that, it was cool. And a lot of that's, my SoundCloud is loaded with countless, endless hours of that kind of stuff. But what burns me out on it is not so much doing that, but trying to twist it into something that people might like. If I stick to just pursuing what I'm naturally interested in doing, such as like long-term techno music improvisation, like the thing about that is that I have a continuing interest in trying to make generative music where there's human involvement, but it keeps doing stuff and runs for hours or endlessly. It would be fun to make something like even one of my hardware synth designs out of just all perfboard and stuff that generates music that can just run continually and be interesting. Now, what kind of music? That depends. Like, it could be very electro, it could be lo-fi hip-hop, because one of the things I will have available is the ability to fire off sample players and things. But what makes it interesting is if I've got company doing it. And when I'm trying to do something like needing to shorten it and fit it into a form that's like CD length, or do songs or singles, I've repeatedly done recordings, and those burn me out real fast. Like, if I try to do one of those songs that I base all of the plugin demos off of, that stuff burns me out real fast. Because it's like trying to write a hit song that is to be judged by the standards of normal hit songs. And of course, that's not going to come out of me. But the attempt is very stressful. And that's why you don't see a lot of rock music, although I can plug in a guitar and jam along to progressive is the word that came to mind, but it's not the right word. Procedural synthesizer stuff. Like, trying to do that can be very enjoyable. But yeah, so basically what I'm saying is, if you're willing to hang out with me while I just blather and do stuff, especially if you would simply enjoy that, I can do that endlessly. It's when I try to be like, and now I will become a pop hit, that becomes very stressful. Maybe that is a good lesson. Maybe that's just a good life lesson. So yeah, as far as commenting and things are concerned, Stan, you did have a question. Cam Twist. No, this is not Cam Twist. It is the Sleepy Circuits Hypno video processor. And I'm very happy with that. That is, I am not nearly on the kind of level where people send me things, so I have to like save up and buy things. The Hypno was well worth it, I thought. And it recently had a bug fix where I had a version with some power supply issues where it got kind of glitchy and twitchy, but I sent it off and it got fixed for free, and they gave me a new case to put it in for free. And I built it into my system, as you can plainly see. And that is something that I enjoy a whole bunch. In fact, when I was doing Music Jam, some of the times that I was having the most fun out of it was when I was improvising stuff and also learning how to do visuals that blended with it. And that's the kind of stuff that will tend to hold my attention. You can kind of build this insane psychedelic trippy techno space with all the dark parts of the imagery replaced with these wild graphics. And if you set it up right with a video switcher system like the one that I've got, it's possible to run it into such a system and have it be really high resolution. So yeah, it is not actually cam twist. It's much better. It's much more. In fact, I was only showing one part of it. I was only showing this video feedback part of it, but in fact, there's much more. Like one of the things going on with it is that you can tell it to take simple visual things and have them interact with each other. Basically, this is a technique that you were seeing. This is two sine wave oscillators at different angles. And what we're doing with them, my apologies for if it gets flashy, because that's a concern with this stuff. It'll sometimes do that. What's happening with it is one of the oscillators, this one, is drifting slowly and the other one is staying still, which is this one. And there are different colors. I have a hue thing which I can adjust the colors. And I've got them set up so that the one sine wave thingy frequency modulates the other sine wave thingy, which frequency modulates the first one back again. And that is really the trick with this particular image processing. This is just the first signal source, which is just a sine thing that is actually linear unless you distort it. And then there's these various ways to distort it as well. And I can change the frequency, like this is a much higher frequency, and I can change the way that it is forming into a loop. That is now straight, or change the angle of it. And then I mentioned that there was a second oscillator, and that is this one that is coming in as a green color. And I can change the angle of that, and I can change the loopy quality of that. But the reason it's getting freaky is because each of them is modulating the other. They're modulating in feedback. And then the brightness, this is an inverted version of it, and this is a positive version of it. But then there's all this other stuff, like you can push this button and cause the feedback stuff to, although I'm not really getting that so much, so hang on, let me, there, I took the feedback away. So now you can see both of the things interacting with each other. But what I did there was, see how it's doing a sort of infinite depth thing here. I'll go with a different appearance. You can see this stuff sort of rocketing off into the distance there. That's because there's a video feedback factor in there as well. And I'm holding down this button that applies it so it can go away or it can go towards you. And it'll happen more as you increase the intensity, because if you've got it like this, you don't really have that much happening, but then you crank it up and it starts blasting out into feedback. The dark stuff winds up getting copies of the other stuff. And then of course we have a different appearance, which is actually squares. But we can make those feedback on each other too. And that gets pretty freaky as well. And this is all the most primitive stuff you can do with it. Because you can also, hey, no, that's a circle factor. Bring in the video image . So yeah, I guess this is actually turning into my vacation day. I'll do a little bit of coding on it. It's not taking up too much time doing this. But yeah, these days when I'm doing video streaming, this is sitting there constantly available. It is always a thing that I have access to if I choose to do something along those lines. So I consider that a gratifying thing. Or we could just have this very chill background. That's the other thing, is I would like to, in my plugin videos and things, it's nice to have this kind of stuff going on in the background just for some visual interest. And Angelo. Yeah, like I said, this is the Sleepy Circuits Hypno. So if you would like to have this in your store, I would recommend talking to the fellow and picking some of them up. I think it is a dynamite little piece of hardware. It's a little Euro rack module. And you can plug, as you can see, two different HDMI signals in at the same time. You can run it into a Blackmagic A10 Mini switcher, at which point the Mini will upsample it. Oh, hello. Are we here? But don't mind me. I'm looking at the warnings of YouTube, and warnings go, the stream's bitrate is lower than the recommended bitrate, which is probably just because I have less of a busy thing going on. I think it freaked me out quite a bit. Or it freaked the stream out quite a bit as I was doing it. Anyways, let's get back to this, because I was kind of thinking more along the lines of making at least a little bit of plugin magic happen, or at least trying. Yeah, Angelo, I am also on the train of people waiting for the Pro M1 base machines to come out. And Arcane Audio, as I'm looking back at the chat again, Arcane Audio, the layers of Mackie Mixer Overdrive are very important, and it might actually lead to me needing to get a somewhat more expensive, but still not like Neve grade. Like that Mackie 8 bus seems to be pretty key. It might be worth me getting one so that I can dial stuff more closely into it, although I ended up having some reservations about using real analog mixers that weren't absolutely extraordinary. And that's what led me to using the Heritage Audio one for a while, because that's like a simple line mixer, but it's more along your, like your Neve style than the Mackie op-amp style. The stuff that I do often doesn't really resort to that distorting everything heavily for effect. And for that reason, when I had analog mixers, which I've had a couple of different ones in play, I was never using it in that way, and I was never getting the benefits of what people do with that. And that could also be something I would simply learn about. Like, I could definitely put together a techno jam with the modular stuff and have that going into like a Mackie 8 bus or whatever, and still really making the thing jump around and do tricks. There's definitely stuff that I can do. That said, it was never the first thing that I was in. I'm somewhat influenced by the engineer Tim Gillies. He used to work at a Big Blue Mini in New Jersey, and he has some very good ideas on mixing heavily distorted guitars, which is that everything up to the amp and speakers is the distortion that matters to you, but then everything after that stage is going to cause problems and is terrible. There's a bunch of guys that are really good at rock style music mixing and such who do not like the Mackies because the Mackies have such trashy op amps, and if you try to do high quality stuff, you'll fail. It won't actually be good. So the deal with that is it's worth paying attention to what purpose you're trying to accomplish, really. So let's see, let us open up a couple of different, like, we're not going to put out a Z low pass or a Z high pass or a Z band pass anytime soon. And the reason is I've only just got the EMU sampler, and there's a lot of learning I got to do before I really master what those things sound like. However, I'm willing to do an initial try that's much less accurate. And one of the things that we were doing was I was doing a lot of this with Alien Kittens because it's so loud. I was setting this up and figuring out how I could make the filter get a cool sound, and I had some experiments going on where I was getting a good distinct sound out of the filter. Like, the distortion here is in the filter, and it's actually set up so that it's bringing an enormous amount of gain into the lows. Without that, the lows would just die off, and that didn't sound right to me. So this is miles away from what the real filter on the sampler sounds like. And so I'm going to be working on it. By contrast, let's drag up the other one. It's not even within shouting distance. Let's go and find it again. I guess I never even made an X high pass for that, but that's fine. Oh, hello, maybe it's not even connected. I think maybe there's nothing on this. Nope, there is. But what we've got here is a lot cleaner. Even though I've already started doing that stuff, it wouldn't get funky. And if I made it go dark, all of my gain, all of my volume would go away. So I'm thinking I'd like to explore this and bring some of the stuff from the experiments I was doing in Z low pass into X low pass. And I have a fairly clear idea what I had in mind with that. And I've got about an hour and 15 minutes or so to do it, with the intention of not burning myself out with too many hours, because that's another thing that happens is when I do those like rock music style recordings that I then end up using it for all the demos for the next 3 years. Part of that is because I have gotten all pumped up and I'm like, I'm composing a song and I'm recording this arrangement and this and recording drums and bass and so on. And it's all very exciting, but it's also like 10 hours of really high intensity work and I just crash afterwards. So we're not going to get into a habit of doing that. Let's see what we have here, because I don't think much is going to happen out of the H file, the header file. I think a lot of this is going to be about the difference between this and this. So here's what we have so far. Our Z low pass had some of this stuff going on. We've got multiple biquads, that's what this is all about. We've got distortion factors in here. This is turning up our gain and then clipping at that point, whereas this is not the same. This is hard clipping and then applying a sine. And the Y low pass is going to be the same thing but without the hard clipping. But what we don't have here is this factor, which is making stuff get louder each time. So the more phases we have in here, and this also might not be the case for the eventual Z low pass, because it might be better to have that one have a specific switch for this is the 6 dB, this is the 12 dB. And even that is not going to be as much around, like, does it formally do the thing that it says it does on the tin? More along the lines of, what do I have to do to make it sound exactly like the hardware unit sounded like? So I see one thing that is going to get involved right away. Here is a clip factor calculation. Let's see what we got here. I don't think that's actually doing anything, although I do have, let's see, what is apparently parameter 4. That's why I wasn't hearing anything at first. Might be worth typing that in. Let's see. We'll call that the frequency. And where did we have that? One of the things I'm kind of rolling with is increasingly as I get into all of this stuff. Oh, Stan, the E6400 is not 12-bit and not 21.05K. You're thinking of the SP1200, not the E6400. The E6400 has potentially a much more modern seeming sample rate and bit depth and stuff, but there's clearly some stuff going on with it. Like when I did the video the other day, I spent hours building these cables to hook it up, because wiring cables by hand, but it was for the purpose of getting the most out of it. And it was very interesting, because when I did run my voice, like you're hearing right now, through the preamplifier and, you know, the good microphone, you could hear what it sounded like going into the video, which is directly off of the Logic Mix. And then I could also run it, although it might be worth, I might have been doing, like the whole thing might have been operating inside console, so there could be things I can do as far as cleaning that up. But I was running a bus directly to the EMU, rather hot, I was clipping a little bit, and then capturing directly back from the EMU into Logic again using the Motu 16A. And man, did it change the sound. It changed the sound in a huge amount. Oh, what weirdo cables did I have? Hang on. I'll show you the ones I made that weren't right. I just have to go and find them. There they are. This is kind of like Colin Bender's way of doing things. Like when I say that, he's not talking about just plugging ribbon cables together in order to hook up his modular. When I say I'm building cables, I'm not talking about buying them from the store. I made these weirdo cables. Check this out. Here's one. So this is a balanced line level, although you could use it for anything, interconnect cable. It is not long enough to reach from the sampler to the interface. But if you take it apart, which I can do by trying hard enough, these connectors are from EWI, East West Industries, which is where I get a lot of cables. And I'd taken a bunch of these off to port the thing over to Eurorack connectors for some snakes that I had. So that leaves me with lots of these plugs. And I built this braided 22 gauge. This is the same gauge that I'm using for the DIY synthesizer stuff. Braided 22 gauge copper wire for the connectors. So seeing as I needed stereo in and stereo out at the least, I could actually get more outputs out of the EMU, and I'm not sure if I'm ever going to need to do that. But it's not unthinkable that I could find a use for it. That's 2 connectors per cable, and this length of weaving heavy copper wire into braids by hand, which I did in 2 sections. There was a long one and then there was a short one, and multiply by 4 for a pair of stereo cables on input and on output. So I made these cables with a lot of, like, my fingers hurt by the time I was finished braiding this stuff together. And I soldered it all together. It is solid as a tank. And you could probably run a toaster off of this stuff. So any bigness that the synthesizer or sampler can produce will certainly be conveyed through this, and then they didn't fit. So rather than try to take them apart, I grabbed more of the plugs because I had another 8 plugs. And you know, it's 8 pairs by the time I was done, because I had to go and do it all over again from scratch to make longer ones, which in this case, when I did the longer ones, what I did was the ground connector on the balanced thing, I used a bare steel wire and then wove that together. I used a lighter wire for those ones actually, but a bare steel wire for the ground connection. And then I took some aluminum tape, folded the edge of it over and wrapped it around the resulting cable and started gradually wrapping it up so that it sealed together, and then crimping it with my bare hands definitely hurts your hands a little bit to do that, so that it would be pressed against the bare wire of the steel connector, so that the very heavy foil shielding I ended up with was making a ground connection. And that's how I did it. And you heard it on that video. That video with me making a sample of, "Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows. Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows. Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows." That's the EMU sampler through a good converter, which I think the Motu is a good converter, and really killer cables. And it does sound absolutely outlandishly huge. So I have hopes that I'll be able to do the plugin stuff, like what I'm getting into this with this. My reference needs to be the hardware at its fullest extent, made to sound as good as it possibly can. And the plugin is going to need to sound as big as I was able to make that sampler sound by just using the best wires and cables and hooking it up right and knowing how to use it. So yeah, this is one of the reasons why people like plugins so much, I think. It's great to be able to make amazing analog sounds in a studio, but man, you're going to put a lot of work into it. And that is highlighted by Colin Benders's recent experiences when he went out and played some gigs and then came back and wanted to reconfigure his system. So he took all of that stuff apart, and his power supply situation is hysterical. It is amazing that he has to bolt like 3 or 4 separate wires onto a set of heavy metal bus bars inside his synthesizers in order to power the modules. It's like, that's not the Eurorec standard, but he and the power supply guy consider that the Eurorec standard is absolute garbage, which it kind of is. They're not the only ones. The guy that does Blue Lantern modules also is of the opinion that Eurorec power supply stuff is pretty inadequate for audio purposes. Angelo, I would, as far as upgrading the 16A, I would use its optical ins and outs and get a fancy boutique DAC or ADC for it. If you're interested in getting it upgraded, I don't think getting the internals modified are necessarily, I mean, I say that and I've been doing that kind of stuff for years, but you will probably get more mileage out of using it as, it depends upon whether you need to have incredible monitoring and digital to analog converter, or whether you're trying to capture so you need analog to digital converters. The capture of all of those channels is, I think, pretty respectable. It's certainly not, it's not a burl. It's not something uber fancy. But that's partly why I'm trying to do plugins that give you that kind of stuff if you want it. You know, soften and round things in the right kinds of ways. But for monitoring, I would strongly recommend just going to the optical out and pipe the optical out into something that's really good. Like, I swear by my little Lavry DA10. And if you need to really be able to hear what you're doing, there are some downsides. Like the Lavry runs on a crystal phase locked loop, meaning that there's a little more latency than you might like. But it's possible to get a sound that's substantially better than the Motu, and that's because you're paying for about the same price, but instead of having to divide it up among 16 different converters and then 16 more converters and then who knows what else for, you know, the ADAT inputs and outputs and such. The Lavry is devoting the same budget to just 2 channels. and it's not attempting to do 192K. The Lavery does everything at 96. I believe it can actually lock on to 192K with a wide phase log loop or something, but I'm not absolutely positive about that. But yeah, I wouldn't work too. The only reason I would work too hard on doing fancy things to the Motu and trying to hot rod it is if you're talking about hot rodding the input stages, or if your workflow involves running 16 channels of analog out to some kind of mixer and then mixing outside the box. Doing that kind of stuff, you'll probably notice something from fancying it up. But if you're just looking for monitoring or something basic, I'd use the optical and get something dedicated for the purpose. So let's dive back into this then, while we can. Got another hour or so. I was going to copy that. What did we call it? Clip factor? So we've labeled some of that stuff. It went here, although I don't think it necessarily absolutely has to. But now we have a gain factor in here. And the next thing is to find where that mattered. We're doing similar stuff here. I can more or less... Oh, hang on. I'm going to take this out. I remember looking into this and going, I don't actually want... Oh, hang on. Maybe I do want that. I'm replicating what I did with the previous one first before going beyond it. So pad clearly is some manner gain staging. And I believe it has something to do with the dry-wet control. Not entirely sure how that would... Yeah, we're doing something there. I could take it out. I'm not sure if I'm going to right now. And then this fits in here in several places. So here's my low pass. Where'd that go again? After there. And this is going to go before the clip each time. And did I have it on all of these or just 3? Nope, all of them. You can see this is consistent. Folks, yeah, you probably like the layout of my code because I'm not a coder. I do this for a reason, and the real programmers don't like it. Because they say you should never repeat yourself. If something is happening 4 times, you should always do it where the computer will do that for you, so you only have to type it once and then do some kind of abstraction that lets it happen 4 times. And I never like that because I can't see what's going on. By the way, Mike, as far as the 48K versus higher sample rate stuff is concerned, the only reason I strongly advocate 96K is so that the plugins have the ability to do some filtering without having to do crazy steep brick wall filtering. Running at 96K or above means I get to put in subtle biquad filters that can be resonant, or they don't have to be resonant if you don't want them to be, that can filter in supersonic regions like hardware might do. And in doing that and shaping it and sculpting it, I can get a a higher quality sound without having to resort to intense brick wall filters and things that to me end up sounding like overprocessing. Biquads don't sound as much like overprocessing to me. They're a really primitive, crude sort of filter. Whereas when you have to do stuff that has a perfect cutoff between like 20K and cancellation or all that sort of stuff, and this includes oversampling, by the way. Any form of oversampling is probably going to be designed to use brick wall filters, and that's a problem. So I design around that so you're not ever expected to physically hear frequencies above the human hearing range. What you're expected to do is appreciate the fact that the computer isn't producing aliasing from having to handle that stuff and echoing it down into the audible range. And that's also what oversampling tries to deal with. I just like my way of handling it better. Let's see, I think we're done here. I guess let's go and quickly see what we've got, because I don't think there's anything more to look at here. This is all there was. This is all there is in Z-Low Pass. Z-Low Pass is designed like the real filters in the EMU, in that this clip factor thing, mine is slightly more varying, but it's consistent with what the real EMU does, which is hard clip within the calculation. This is, although clip factor might be 1 for the EMU calculation, this is literally what the EMU filter does. So I'm going to be trying to get stuff to sound right using that as a concept. But this is my style, and that's soft clipping. That's not hard clipping. So what I've just added is a clip factor thing. As I increase this value from 0 onwards, it will start cranking out the gain and the distortion factor of the filter enormously. And I'll probably also get an interesting result when I do this on the Y-Low Pass, but for now I'm going to do it on the X-Low Pass, and let's hear what that sounds like. I can put this away because I don't think I need it anymore. Go into the build folder. In this older version of macOS, I don't have to reboot the computer to see new plugins, which is convenient. Yeah, I don't agree with what FabFilter says about that. So let's see, now that I have to take it right down immediately because otherwise it will explode. But let's zero some of these things out and see what we've got. Full wet, firstly. Oh wait, hang on. This is basically slope. And as you can hear, when I turn it down, all the sound goes away. That's not consistent with what the sampler actually does. You get a little bit more thunder out of the real thing when you do this. So what happens when we turn up clip factor? Interesting. Well, we can definitely distort it to silence. Let's try 0.25 is literally just one stage. I'm not impressed with that as a filter. What's going on here? I'm not getting any filtering now. Here I am though. I think I got a typo in there somewhere. It's supposed to do this even at this stage. Well, we're also padding stuff way too much. Let us go back into here and see what happens if we don't have this here. Because I feel kind of like I'm not interested in... Let's make it simpler. Let's take the pad out as well as we took the low boost out. And we're trying to do that functionality not with the low boost and stuff, but with the actual algorithm itself. The algorithm is now getting boosted at each stage. And I'm going to take a moment and glance at this and try to see why it wasn't doing what I thought. Like wet's supposed to fade into one stage of distortion at... it's supposed to fade into one filtering pole at 0.25, and then another one at 0.5, another one at 0.75, and then another one at 1.0. That's what it's supposed to do. It's not doing it. So there we've got our thing. This seems weird. Maybe I'm not going to worry about that right now. Let's do one thing at a time for once in my life. As long as I can get it to a well-behaved situation that I can test other things with, that's good enough for me. Now what happens when we start distorting this? Well, I like that texture, but this is so damn quiet. Why is this so quiet? Okay. This is cool. It's weird, but it's cool. I'll just turn it up on this. Let's not worry about that other stuff so much. Yeah, so we didn't see this coming, but this is cool. I can make it basically just kind of die here, but it sort of gets pinned. If I turn it up too much, it just freaks. But we can make definitely a thundery filter kind of thing. Now what about if we use the filter a little bit lower and then distort that? Well, one thing about it, we're getting a lot of distortion in the sense of too high of an output. So let's just, I think this is still sitting there in the buffer. We'll scale back down after this and may or may not need to worry about scaling back down by the, one thing we could do is just this. We'll see which one matters. So we're pinning it to the max. Actually, that doesn't make any sense. Let's not do that. When you sign 1.5 or negative 1.5, you're going to get 1 on the output. So this should be, oh, input sample times equals trim. That's what it's doing it. (1.0 plus 0.5 minus by quad A. So this is another trim. This is another gain trim factor. Let's delete this while we're at it and see what we get. Where does it show up? It's showing up in almost all of these, but we have clip factor for that, so we don't need it. We'll take that out. Now let's see what we got. If we can get this behaving super well, we can just delete all of the stuff that's commented out and go from there. The fact that I'm simplifying it a step at a time is probably what's going to be helpful, and I want to see where I get, because a lot of this stuff, you know, trim, low boost and stuff is all just trying to get a behavior that I'm getting in another way now. What do we got now? And then if we turn up clip factor, which is going to boost the gain at each stage, you can get it to sort of choke itself out. And that is sensitive to the frequency here. So that's another thing that could get an adjustment in there. And then if I have it at a higher frequency, okay, this has a cool sound to it in this way. Sounds real grungy. So, how's that grab you? Here's our new filter, right? All of this is being done by, oh wow, okay. Oh, you know, I just realized something I was doing wrong. This dry wet is still doing what it's supposed to, but there's a reason why I was not seeing one stage at 0.25, another at 0.5, and so on. And it's because I have a power factor in here. So this is basically going to one pole at 0.5, at which point we have a full filtering factor going on. Then 2 at 0.75, I guess, and so on. So that's pretty intense. Maybe let's make that thing go back. I don't think I need that much wet in there. Goodness gracious me. Hiccups, yikes. Drinking too much of my chai tea. And let's take these things out. These are all workarounds for something that we're able to do in another way. No more pad. No more trim because we're doing it here. We'll leave that in there for now, unless I want to take it out later. And I think clip factor needs to... Clip factor equals 1.0 minus biquad A point, which is my value from 0 to 0.5 that corresponds to the frequency in the biquad filter. And that's multiplied by getParam kparam1. And if I... Here's a crazy thought. Can you guess what this does? How does that grab you? What do you think is going to happen? Remember, this is a tiny, tiny number. But what was happening was when I had low frequencies, it went into distortion much more easily. When I had high frequencies on the filter, it didn't want to distort nearly as much. So what I've done is made clip factor be 1 minus, and the smaller it gets, the more boost we end up getting. That multiplied by itself. So in theory, it's going to be way less sensitive to getParam kparam1. I might have to put in another factor to make it be more increased, but now it boosts more as the frequency goes higher. And it boosts less as the frequency goes lower. So we're going to try that, see if it still distorts at all. And see whether it now stops doing that gain thing it was doing, where you could make it just blow up by turning the distortion up a lot and having the frequency go really low. Because I was going to have to compensate for that in some way, and this is probably how. Also note this. This is now dry. This is now one phase of filter, 2, 3, and 4. That's what it was supposed to be. I changed that, I guess, because I wanted it to be more extreme in these extremes. Okay. So far good. So far so good. Let's see what else we got. We are now not going into overload and blowing up at the low frequencies. But we're not getting obvious distortion anywhere, though. This was probably the right correction. But we've taken away our ability to distort everything to crap because we no longer have enough clip factor. Now what we've got is basically just this. This is just plain filter with no extra gain. It still has a distortion factor in it though, but this is not adding extra overload. And this is all the extra gain we have right now. I would say this is cool sounding, but this is not what I had in mind. It needs more power. We need more power. By the way, are we still connected? I think we are. Yep. I'm liking the fact that OBS started becoming able to use the Apple hardware encoder, even if it's causing me some drop frames and problems. Because that means I can now do like VCV rack streams and things as well. My CPU went from like 30% to like 2 or 3 with all this running, including Chromium in the background. That said, it does throw the occasional problem, so I will just have to see how that goes in future and hope that it continues to behave itself. So let's see. Where are we at? Let's give it a much bigger range. So now we've got 8 times more possible gain. I want to see how this relates to the various frequencies we were working with. Ideally, I want to make it so that I have a very high frequency cutoff and it's still nasty as hell. I feel like that might have a cool sound to it. So let's dial it right back for starters and see where we got. That's not much of a difference. Hello. Well, maybe it'll kick in at other frequencies. You remember when we have this frequency stuff? Oh, I think I might know what might be happening. Let's... So no boost to full boost gives us... Yeah, that's louder. I'm a little concerned at the height of peaks I was getting when I do this. I feel like I shouldn't be getting 3.92 on the meter. That doesn't seem to make sense. Let's do something even sillier. Especially since we only need to run this once every sample buffer, because this is being calculated, this is at the top of the thing before we go into while and sample frames. So this is being calculated only once every however many samples your latency is. Latency is basically this. Basically, we're doing this stuff upon firing every new buffer, and latency is how big that buffer size is going to be. So it's going to do 16 samples, or it's going to do 64, or it's going to do 1024, however many that is. But it only has to run this once per buffer, so I'm not concerned about running a square root. And what the square root is going to do to a tiny little value like this is make it a lot bigger. It's like, rather than having it be the power of biquad A, I'm doing a sort of intermediate thing where it's like biquad A times, oh, guess what? Not quite as much as biquad A was before. And we can probably take out this boost factor, because this is probably going to get us into a zone, if not the zone. Part of doing this the way that I do it is getting a sense for what feels right when it's like, okay, it's super not distorting here and it's distorting much more there, and I want it to distort like this and that and the other thing. So what would I need to do to these numbers to make them start acting right? Knowing that that filter number is going to be very tiny for the low frequency stuff and 0.5 for Nyquist. Let's see what we got. We've got a nice rumble, but not a lot of boost. I gotta say, that's a kind of cool sounding, gnarly, like if you took this and ran it into McAdee, you'd get a really messy bass. It would be gnarly. Let's do exactly that. Check this out. Effect stack, sometimes I use these. Add effect, X low pass. It's not terribly loud this way, but guess what? We can make it be louder by firing up McAdee, which will distort it neatly, so I no longer have to worry about clipping it. This is more like what you'd get on a mix if you had multiple things going in. I have to turn my monitoring back down again. That's a lot of thunder. So here's a possible angle on where I'll be taking the sampler stuff. Dry wet does this. So this would be like your 6 dB. This would be your 12. For the final one, I'd probably want to have a switch so that it would accurately do one of the settings on the real machine. And yeah, it's about doing this kind of stuff. It's about... But with the Airwindows version, you get to crossfade between the various levels, so... Oh, hell yeah, that's going to work. D&B heads are going to enjoy this. That is what I would call a heavy bass rumble. We're making progress. This is very similar to what people were trying to get out of that stuff. Hey, David. Hey, check it out. I made a heinous drum and bass noise. It's gnarly. I think this is making some good progress. And not only that, I think people are going to find the end result very plausibly like what they were getting out of the old gear. And that pleases me. probably have this frequency be a little higher than this, but we are onto something. This is making progress. So let's stop that and save this as DNB tester. Because that's the idea. Is here's where we're going to try our stacks of things for the plugins that are meant to make sense when used in conjunction with like Macity. Because these don't have to do everything all by themselves. That said, I bet I can bring this a little bit more by, let's put that back, that big boost factor again, and see what we get. Because this is getting into the zone where I could let people have this. After all, it is the X version. The Y version is the version that doesn't have pinning to, the Y version is the version that's going to wavefold intensely. And it's sort of a variation off of this, but it'll buy me a little time to tinker with things, so I'm comfortable with doing that in a separate week. Oh, I have to quit the program first. We can do that. And back into the breach. Back to just only the filter. Okay, we start to get to a point of too muchness here. There's too much gain here. Okay, this is interesting. Not to say kind of nasty. Interesting, okay. We're getting something. At this boost level, and at exactly one stage, we got this whole instability thing going on. Yeah, listen to that. We have a weird sweet spot going on. Below this, it's peaky. It's like suppressing things. Above this, it's just kind of loud. But at the sweet spot, it's acting like another distortion device again. Interesting. And then again, as I turn it up, it's going to go into increasing meltdown. Oh man. thought that it's louder than my voice. Guys, do you want this? This is a little more along the lines of what I would call the Y filter. Would it make sense to have this be also part of the X filter? Because there's some downsides to this. Like, this is getting stuck at a DC offset, which is not great. The DC offset factor of this is not awesome. That's loud. That's going to be well behaved. You know, I think I can probably find a sweet spot here and leave the melting down and throwing DC offset for the Y filter. Besides, the Y filter, since it wavefolds, is less likely to remain stuck at maximum DC offset when you do this. And that's helpful. So where do we... There. So at what point do we get, even quietly, that DC offset we were talking about? Because if we do this, we're stuck. And if we do this, we have a frequency coming through. So it's going to increase to some point. Just like that. I almost feel like it would be nice to put another gain compensation in there, but I'm not sure about it. Yeah, I feel like I'm missing something. Let's make that be 2 and see where we get. Clamp that a little higher. I'm listening real hard because I'm hearing funny noises in my place and I'm not sure where they're coming from. Although I'll tell you, one of the things that's making a noise is something I forgot. I left the Rhodes on. Whatever the phony noises were, I'm not continuing to hear them. They sounded kind of like a radiator, but I wouldn't imagine that the radiator would be on because it's relatively warm. Anyways, I just updated this. we're doing this. Get parameter param1 is the boost factor here. That's something that wouldn't necessarily relate to a high pass, although it would relate to a band pass. Hearing such faint noises from the kind of thing where you try to think about whether one of your synthesizers or whatever is blowing up and catching fire because it's making these subtle noises that are going to produce the magic smoke and all that kind of stuff. But that's probably me just imagining it. Guess we'll find out, won't we? On stream. Joking aside, let's go on. Where's our output? Okay, we were cutting down clip factor. Maybe that's not great. And I'm really puzzled by why in the world, when I'm going through all these stages, does the final stage of the biggest bass boost wind up so tiny? I would have thought that putting this clip factor in here and continually increasing it, even if it is only to this amount, would boost me up to maximum output value at some point. That seems like that would make sense, but it doesn't seem to be happening. On the other hand, we now have a lovely, simple algorithm here with nothing else happening. So let's see what we've got. That's not what I meant to do. Back into here. So what we can hear out of this let's put more stages in. Okay, I clearly dialed that back a little bit. This is a satisfactory tone. I'm just concerned by how much quieter it is than... Well, this is not that much quieter than what the average sound is. It's acting like a compressor or something. I just didn't want it to be. You know, there's a certain logic to the fact that clip factor times 1 is 2, and our maximum frequency boost approaches 0.5. Let's try to calculate this out then. Maximum frequency boost approaches 0.5. That's because biquad A, 0.5 is the Nyquist frequency on the biquad filter. It's not actually ever going to reach there, but it's going to try. And biquad A of 0, which we can't actually get anywhere near, is DC, subsonics. So clip factor is 1 minus this other stuff, and it keeps getting boosted as a result of that. So if we didn't have kparam 1, 0.5 times square root 0. Well, let me grab a calculator and actually fuss with this calculation. I want to see what happens if I make it so that the having it be at Nyquist gives me a full a accurate full boost of clip factor literally 1, which would mean it would be divided by 0, which would be not okay. But I want to see what we get. And that is actually a very interesting concept. That's something that I have to be concerned about, because I am applying clip factor by dividing. So it's becoming increasingly aggressive the farther I go. Now, if it was 1 plus stuff, then it could increase as much as it wanted. This is the only way we're applying. Let's fool with that, shall we? Let's see what we actually get by doing that change. Now, outsample is multiplied by this rather than attempting to divide it by that. So in theory, you can go up as much as you want, and it's not going. Although if I didn't, it would just be connected to the frequency control, which is a whole other question. But then the frequency control is already tying into biquad A, so that would just be undesirable. Have the same thing affecting the same thing in too many different ways, it's just going to get confusing. Alrighty. Now, what do we got here? Well, we can boost to 3.92. I don't know why. I thought we would be clipping to the extremes of a sine, but apparently the extremes of a sine are 3.92. We've got heavy crunch. 0.5 seems to be a median value. But is it? Not really. This is about where our supreme overclip is happening. I know. Stray thought. Let's not have this square root there. Let's just make it go fully exponential. Because this is going to make it go fully exponential. We're going to need the full amount of this boost or more. So let's set it up so that we can have more if we want. We have a factor which will let us apply the amount of this that we're applying. It's the same as if we had a parenthesis in here. Multiplication, it's all going to be commutative. And we're just boosting by this squared. Same as pow biquad A 0, 2. And it's not really random, but it can be if I want it to be. It's more like this needs to be more, this needs to be less. Now what am I thinking? Oh, hang on. It needs to be more here, it needs to be less there. Fire up a power function and be like, okay, power of 3, because it needs to be way more here and way less there. And you wind up with okay, that's not too crunchy. Clean to many stages. We don't have enough gain on tap. Let's give it more gain on tap. lots more. And see where we get, because there's probably a sweet spot in here somewhere. On the other hand, the amount of intensity between the ability to... One thing that's happening that's frustrating me is I'm losing that capacity to have the lows become thunderous again, but the reason that's happening is because I have a power factor in here. Oof, goodness gracious. Also, it might have something to do with the fact that I'm not getting output louder than was going in. Okay, let's shut that down for a second. I am not liking how incredibly much louder it is when I have the highs in there. This is disappointing to me. Oh, yeah, I'm loving this tone though. Get if we go to 0.5. This might give us a useful extreme limit for our thing. Alrighty then. So this seems like it's gotten to a place that kind of works. We can go relatively. I'm not entirely happy with where this frequency control sits. I feel like the low stuff should be sitting more over here, and it's way up here to the point where the range of highs is just like right up there. So it needs to have the low sitting more over here. That seems weird. What can we do about that? This power factor. If we set this to 32, we now have a range of 0 to 1 on that control. And doing it this way does get us a, see now. See our biquads here. Biquad A, 0. That's our frequency control, and that's exactly what is giving me pause as far as, like, what else can we do here? So if we had this, then we would have a thing where if we were at Nyquist, compensation would be 0.5. That's how this works out, is we don't get to run the biquad filter up to a point of 1. If we have everything twice as loud as it should be when it's that loud, then by quad A times 4, the 0.5 becomes 2, the 0.001 becomes 0.004. So that's never going to be 0, so we don't have to worry about dividing by it. That's going to give us probably way too much boost. But it might be a start. Stop doing that. Darn it. So let's see what we got out of this craziness. I could see a square root factor entering in here. Or it might just blow up immediately. Let's see whether we even have a... I'm going to turn it down just a hair in case I get terrible results. Interesting. Okay. So here's the thing. This is all way too loud, but the basic concept seems to be working. I can see it in roughly the right area. That's intense. Okay, so how about bring in that square root stuff again? This is a good place to do it, as it's only once per buffer. Now it's going to be square root of 0.5 as the max. That makes it 0.707 for at Nyquist. So 0.5 times 4 gave us a factor of 2. 0.7 times 4 is going to give us a factor of something else. And multiplying this number is going to cause things to become quieter. So let's just jump it to 16 and see whether that has now given us something that behaves. I've changed the factor by which the curve that it's operating under, and I've also changed the amount to some extent. And I could also bring in the sliders if I wanted to fine-tune this down, which might be a good idea. If I can get it so that it's sitting at a very consistent volume level, that might be a fine idea. Alrighty, full crank. And it gets louder. And then it gets quieter again. That means that the square root factor is maybe not what we want, because although it's attenuating nicely, I gotta say, Yeah, when it's way down here and I'm using this to attenuate, what's happening is this. Compensation is square root of that times 16. We're dividing by compensation, so our boost is increasing by the amount that it is tiny, but it's less tiny because it's a square root. That seems like it's too much of an effect, so we'll take the square root back out again. Let's actually leave that 16 there. Both of these are doing the same thing. I'm not going to go much longer today, but this seems like... We'll also fire up Alien Kittens and we'll hear what it sounds like scrunching away on something. Also, how are we doing for the stream crashing? Probably the stream's not crashing. We'll see. Hello. That's what we were looking for. Nice. I think we got it. This is acting like what I wanted. Oh, except for it doesn't relate very well to dry, does it? Yikes. In fact, it does not relate to these at all. It's all very well when frequency is very high, but when frequency is very low and you're using dry, this part is fine, but the slower the slope, the closer we are to dry, the more unreasonable it becomes. So we can't have that. We're not done. But the general workflow of this, okay, so let's fix that. How do we fix that? Well, input sample divided by equals compensation. We are not actually going to be applying that to all of our dry samples. Like if we apply it directly to dry sample, that's not good. So we need to be applying this compensation inside these somewhere, and we need to be applying it only on the stuff that we want it on. So let's grab that, add a space and grab that. And tuck it into some of these places. In fact, maybe we can tuck it into this algorithm. We can. Kind of like that. Now I will point out that we were going to have to readjust it again, possibly with a bunch of fancy math, because now we're applying it at every stage. So first we see what it does. whether the whole thing just straight up explodes. Explode? It's loud, but I wouldn't call it exploding all by itself. Maybe it kind of is, though. Yeah, that's our raw. We're definitely applying it where it does not belong. Perhaps in A here. Yeah, because if we're all the way to dry, oh, it really shouldn't be doing that. We're making dry sample out of input sample at each stage. If A wet is 0, when is A wet 0? Can it ever be 0? Should be able to be. Yeah, if it's 0, it'll be 0 here. It'll be 0 there. All of them can be 0. Therefore, dry sample is going to be coming through from here. Input sample equals not this at all, and then dry sample, and then back again. So that should be not doing what it's doing. That's a little confusing. Bro's back. Hey. I see these start out at 1, though, if nothing is happening. This is a big else statement. I really should be able to dial this back. I always look that way, don't you worry about it. Now what? What do I get if I just don't apply that on the first stage? What happens if I just only do that once? It seems like that worked once before. If I do that, then this input stage always ends up being a lot quieter. And that gets increasingly more insane because I never told it not to be. Let's leave that there and just do less of it. We're dividing by compensation, which is this. If we crank it up a lot more, then what? Or maybe square rootify it. Let's go back to that. After all this time, we're applying it over and over, so maybe that is correct. And let's finally throw in the third slider so we can fine-tune it and see whether we get anywhere a little faster than this doing stuff one at a time nonsense. I am going to have to turn that up, however, rather than have it be at 0 immediately. In fact, it might crash and die on me, so maybe I should be so please don't die on me if you're set to 0. Thank you. Tempted to make that be a floating point 0. It's just a safety check anyway. All right, can we run and not crash? We can. Now you're not at 0. Okay, if we do this, compensation is compensating a lot. I think we might be able to dial in a number this way. This is acting a lot like it's going to work. See? It's fine here. It's fine here. And this is with clip factor cranked all the way up. So let's find what's the good value. And how does this affect things if clip factor is not 0? Well, one thing about it is now it's damping things very heavily that way. You tell me, bro. You know, I could tie clip factor to dry web. a little nasty. Hang on. I think we might be looking at a 2 slider plugin here. Let's bounce back. What are we set to? What do we get if we nuke it completely? And this is exactly 0.1. Okay, I like that. So, yeah, I might be just finishing this up in an insane burst of whatever you call this. Because remember, this is not going to be the final Z-plane style filter. This is a preliminary thing, the Airwindows X factor. So it's going to need to be like my style. And I think I know how that can be done. .1 means that would be 6.4. Ain't never going to be 0 if I'm not multiplying it by something that can be 0, so I can take that back out again. Freak should be on the top. Two, and that's just become a dual ganged pot. Mind you, this might not work, but cool. And then it's being applied at every stage. Good, good. go in and handle this. And then we'll see what else we can get as far as variations on this for the other ones. And of course the Y series, which will be even more insane. But it pleases me to have an Airwindows plugin that is more mad than the most heinous use of the emu filters combined with the Mackie channel stages. That's pleasing. Compiling. Build succeeded. David, we're not going to need to. You check this out. Meet the X low pass filter. At low nuke levels, it acts kind of normal-ish. Then as you increasingly I dare say you don't need ULAW after this. And the levels are nicely balanced and everything. I'm going to say that's a good day at work. So a lot of this is relatively well behaved, like it's good at bringing up that thundery stuff though if you want it. But we don't have to stop there. Before I go, let's fire up that effect stack again. Okay, D&B folks, I think you were all set up now. David? You really think you need ULAW? That sounds positively electro. Now it's Berlin techno. All right. Have fun with this next Sunday. I think this is going to be the next one. I think we are ready to roll with it. I might do a little bit more testing, but I dare say that's about it, because there's not really a lot of ways to adjust something like that once you have it dialed in so that it behaves when twisted into various forms. The use cases aren't going to be all that different for different inputs coming in. So yeah, there you go. Talk to you folks later. Bye-bye.